or 12:15. Now, I've concluded that the solution to people thinking that we're getting out late if it's 12:30 is that we'll just get out at 12:30 every week. And you'll get conditioned. Some of you say you already do that. Well, some people avoid and skip communion. They say no because they're concerned about eating and drinking unworthily. It's from 1 Corinthians 11. And they have a specific idea of what it means to eat unworthily, and it's not what 1 Corinthians 11 says it is. And so some people avoid communion because they don't feel worthy. But let's really ask the question, are any of us worthy? We're really not. So some people simply skip communion. But here's a principle that you'll have to admit is true. Hungry people don't usually skip meals. And so if someone skips communion, I have to ask the question, are they really hungry? And what are they hungry for? Here's this text, Matthew chapter 5, verse 6. It's part of the Beatitudes, part of the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus says these words. He says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied." Now, one of the commentators I was reading suggested that what we should really do is take the word righteousness out and put in the word God. Blessed are those who are hungering and thirsting for God, because those who are hungering and thirsting for righteousness can only find it in God. And so blessed are those who are hungering and thirsting for God. And what Jesus is trying to do is he's trying to take the physical needs of eating and drinking, and he's trying to emphasize them and make it a spiritual need. And so he uses these physical needs that we have, hungering and thirsting. I found it very interesting to read in this little book by a guy named William Barclay. Most preachers use Barclay's commentaries so much that some preachers call him Saint William because he has such good stuff. But in Barclay's commentary, Barclay points out that it's very difficult for us in this day and age in which we live in America. It's very difficult for us to understand what hungering and thirsting means. He concludes that almost none of us have ever really experienced hungering and thirsting. You go to the grocery store and it's full, it's packed full of stuff. Now, it's expensive, I understand that, but it's packed full of stuff. We live in an age of plenty, in a place of bounty. And really, probably none of us have ever been hungry to the place we're starving, hungry to the place that it's beginning to affect the fat tissues in our bodies. Most of us have never experienced that. Probably none of us have ever experienced that. Furthermore, we have never experienced thirst. In a day of, you want water, just turn the spigot on, turn the faucet off. Water bottles are everywhere. You can buy them. You know, it's difficult to think about being really thirsty. But in the ancient world, the people that Jesus are talking to, there was no such thing as fresh water on every street corner. And so they understood what it was like to be walking long distances and maybe run out of water and it be hot and dry. So Jesus is really talking about experience that the people had and most of us can't understand. This is the way Barclay concludes it. He says, "So then, the hunger which this beatitude describes is no genteel hunger which can be satisfied with a mid-morning snack. The thirst of which it speaks is no thirst which can be slacked by a cup of coffee or an iced drink. It is the hunger of a man who is starving for food and the thirst of a man who will die unless he drinks." And Jesus says, blessed is the man and the woman who's hungering and thirsting for God like that. The sad thing is, that most of us, even though we've never experienced the kind of physical and hunger and thirst, many of us have also never experienced that kind of spiritual hunger and thirst either. And the greatest tragedy is not perhaps that we don't experience it. The greatest tragedy is that we don't even know in our hearts that we're not experiencing it. We're satisfied with our lives, not hungering and thirsting after God, because our lives are so filled up with so much else that takes care of our hunger and thirst for life. And perhaps we're so full that there's no room for God. I remember seeing a picture like this in which aid was being taken to people in a famine area, and people lining up in line to receive the food. And here the UN truck is full of water, and the people lining up with their 5-gallon buckets just to get just 5 gallons of water because of the drought. And I think of the tragedy of these people experiencing these problems. And yet I wish you were hungering and thirsting for God like that. What if we were? What if when we uncover the bread and the grape juice this morning, what if people couldn't wait in their pews and they stormed the table? That's a scary thought, isn't it? Hungering and thirsting for Jesus. We've come today to have a meal together. It won't satisfy your belly, but it will satisfy your heart. It won't fill your stomach, but it will fill your soul. And I ask you to ask yourself this question: have you come hungering and thirsting this morning? And the fact is, nothing will satisfy you like Jesus will. That's my prayer for you this morning. It's an interesting phrase. It says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst." Now, the word blessed is an interesting word because it can be translated in many ways. Some people translate it, Chuck Swindoll translates it happy. Actually, I think Chuck Swindoll translates it happy many times over. The idea is joyful, blissful. And I think this is interesting because usually we don't think of people who are hungering and thirsting as having joy. But there's something contained in this text. Did you see the promise? It says, those who hunger and thirst after Jesus, it says, they will be satisfied. There's the promise. We are blessed when we hunger and thirst after Jesus because the promise is we'll be satisfied. Different translations. The King James says they shall be filled. Most of you are probably familiar with that wordage. But I like Phillips. It says they will be not only satisfied, they will be fully satisfied. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, because they will be fully satisfied. A translation most of you have never heard of, the easy-to-read version. I like it because it doesn't just say they will be fully satisfied, but it says it puts the noun in it. It says God. It makes it plain. God will fully satisfy them. God will fully satisfy them. So it is that we come to this table today just going to drink a little bitty bit of grape juice, a little bitty square of something that looks very much like pie crust. It won't take care of giving you calories to run for the day, but it will fill your heart completely with the only thing that really matters to fill our hearts with, and that's with Jesus. So he says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst, for they shall be fully satisfied. Even though this text is not about communion, I think it fits here. Psalm chapter 34, verse 8, it says, "Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good." And the communion service, the Lord's Supper service, gives us the opportunity to do that all over again this morning. So I challenge you to this morning seek Jesus as we partake of this communion service. I want to remind you, if you're visiting with us, that we practice an open communion. And if you love Jesus, we're very happy for you to share our communion service with us. And so at this time, we will separate, as we do, into various places to have our foot washing service. And the men will be downstairs in the back fellowship hall room. The ladies are in the front. Actually, they're in the back boardroom. The ladies are in the back of the fellowship hall, and then the families are in the front of the fellowship hall. And for those of you who can't make stairs, we have the office right here prepared for you to be able to take communion, to take the foot washing service up here. And then after the foot washing service, we will come back together and receive of the Lord's Supper.